friends, in this brief audio lecture, I will be dealing about certain membrane disorders which result because of the mutation, because of the abnormality in the structural functional aspects of the plasma membrane. For example, mutation of membrane proteins affects the functions of membranes to various extents, because the proteins in the membrane, they are not only the components of the structure, or they don't only make the structure of the plasma membrane, but it is a protein which has to perform so many functions which the plasma membrane basically perform, may be related to the membrane transport, may be related to the cell signaling, may be related to the cell-cell communication, or may be related to the cell division or the cell cycling. It is a protein which has to perform all those diversified functions in the form of receptors, in the form of transporters, in the form of ion channels, in the form of enzymes, and in the form of course, the structural components of the protein. So if there is a mutation to any of these proteins, the structural and functional aspects of the membrane are hampered or they suffer. Now let's take the example. There is a one disease which is called as hereditary spherocytosis. What happens basically in this disease? A gene gets mutated, and that gene basically codes for a protein which is called as spectrin. So when there is a mutation in this spectrin gene, what happens? The tendency of the red blood cells to become spherical happens rather than biconcave. So just a mutation in the spectrin gene of the RBC membrane proteins, what happens is the shape of the RBC tends not to be biconcave disc, but it shifts towards a spherical shape. So you understand, when the shape of the RBC now changes from biconcave to spherical, so obviously the functioning of the RBC changes. So this is one example of the membrane disorder which happens because of the genetic defect or mutation to the membrane protein. Similarly, another case is there are certain membrane proteins, they can trigger the production of certain antibodies by the immune system itself. For example, if there is a chance that the self antibody or the autoantibody can be created and it will bind to the membrane protein itself. So there are so many diseases in human beings wherein the cause is that certain of the antibodies are developed in our body which we call as autoantibodies, or which we call as autoimmunity. What happens is these antibodies attack the membrane proteins. So when this thing happens, it alters the membrane functions greatly. For example, autoantibodies created against the acetylcholine receptors in the skeletal muscle. What happens? A disease called as myasthenia gravis is caused. So this results in the degeneration of the particular muscle, because frequently and continuously the antibodies try to destroy the acetylcholine receptor in the skeletal muscle. Similarly, there is another problem. The ischemia can quickly affect the integrity of various ion channels in membrane. If there is this problem happens in the membrane, so various ion channels stop to operate and our membrane shrinks, or our membrane may not function properly. So this is not only membrane disorder. There are so many membrane disorders, but this was important to highlight or to sensitize you about the functioning of the membrane and its relation with the disorders of certain protein components. Similarly, there are so many problems with the cholesterol, right? If there is not enough of the cholesterol in the cell, membrane will not function properly. So again, we will be dealing with these things when we will take up the membrane types of the membrane transport in next lecture. So the main purpose of this small audio lecture was to make you understand that various types of membrane disorders are created when there is some abnormality with the structural or functional aspects of the membrane proteins itself, because membrane proteins are under the control of genes. So if there is a gene mutation, ultimately the problem will lie with the membrane functioning. Similarly, the abnormalities with the membrane transporter, this ion channel like sodium potassium pump, the chloride channel, other things, the chloride shift problem. So many diseases arise in human beings because of that particular thing. Also, you might have heard about the cystic fibrosis disease that results when there is a problem with the chloride ion channels in the plasma membrane or the cell membrane. So you will be knowing more about this, but this was very important to make you understand about the membrane disorders because of the mutation in the protein genes which make up the different protein components of the plasma membrane. So this is enough for the membrane disorder part of this audio lesson series on plasma membrane.